The New York Times, the big one, is suing OpenAI and Microsoft to end the practice of using its stories to train chatbots. The federal complaint accuses the two companies of advancing their technology through the unlawful use of work owned by the New York Times. Artificial intelligence and automation expert Patrick Dix is here to break this lawsuit down. Patrick, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me again.
Now, tell us a little bit about why the New York Times is suing, because there have been other people, from Sarah Silverman to others, who have brought up this issue, but this one seems to have some teeth because they have come with the receipts.
Well, with the New York Times, one of the big reasons that they are suing, it revolves around money. And one of the things is with OpenAI and Microsoft using chatbots, they're able to emulate journalists and they're able to emulate writers. So one of the things is if you go to the New York Times website and after a certain number of times visiting the website, it'll ask you to subscribe. What will happen is readers will be able to go to the chatbots from the stories that it's generated, go to the chatbots and get those stories versus going on the website and subscribing to the site. So it all boils down to money. That is the ultimate thing. This boils around money.
Right. So what you're saying is that when you go to ChatGPT, for people who don't know, you can put in a search, and in that search, it might retrieve information from the world of the internet. And one of those articles might be from the New York Times that on another platform, New York Times, you would have had to pay for. But ChatGPT, you don't pay for it, but it will bring to you that same information that you would have had to pay for elsewhere, translating into they're losing money, just like Patrick said. So what is the New York Times saying exactly, and what do they want to happen, Patrick?
Basically, what they want to say, they want to ultimately reach an agreement to where they can allow them to use their information, because other platforms, if you read the article, have reached agreements with Microsoft and OpenAI to say, hey, you can use our information, but you have to pay us for it. Again, it boils down to money. So the New York Times is going to smarten and wise up and say, hey, why not use this as a way to make money versus just keeping them away from the information? And that's what New York Times is arguing about now. Should we get compensatory damages, or should we just take this to court? Because there are no rules or regulations that stop this from happening. And this is the gray area of artificial intelligence. And we must have regulations put in place to prevent this from happening, because this will continue to happen. And I could see cases like this reaching the Supreme Court to have them rule on it.
Absolutely. In due time, the Supreme Court is ultimately have to decide on AI. You know, I think what's interesting about what the New York Times has also said in their argument is that when you put a search in ChatGPT, it spews information based on the New York Times, but that information is almost identical to the articles, and that's another issue. So now you have this information that you've generated a search for, and it reads almost exactly like the original article itself. So they are kind of on the fence about whether or not this actually makes sense for them. What do you think, Patrick, about this idea that if you do put a search in, that generated search actually retrieves something different, something that really belongs to you all of a sudden?
Well, I spoke to a lawyer friend of mine about this earlier, about how the New York Times, they do have legal grounds to sue for intellectual property and copyright infringement. And what people don't realize, when you go to ChatGPT, just like when you do a Google search, it holds your IP address and it remembers where that information came from. So when you see people online saying, hey, I'm going to use AI to generate an image, or even when you use ChatGPT, because what people don't know about ChatGPT is eventually you have to pay for it if you want to get different results. So every time you go to ChatGPT, you're actually letting it get a data set. It's going out to other data sets, It is learning what you're searching for, and it's going out to pre-existing data sets using machine learning. So it is learning, hey, this person looked for this person looked for that. And even if it was to go on another article, let's say the New York Times, or to go on to the Wall Street Journal, that is the gray area to where, hey, is this copyright infringement, or are we stealing someone's intellectual property? That is the defined gray area that has not been discussed legally or in court yet.
And another gray area that I want your opinion on, Patrick, is who is actually doing the infringement? Do you blame the person who's actually doing the search equally, to ChatGPT, or do you think that ChatGPT is the heavy in this situation?
Well, the person doing the search, they don't know they're infringing on someone's IP or copyrighted material. I blame OpenAI, ChatGPT, Microsoft, those companies, because they know they're going to have end users. Millions of people a day go on ChatGPT to have assignments written. They look for information. They have reports written. So the actual person does not know they're violating the law. But OpenAI and ChatGPT and Microsoft, all three of those constituents know they are breaking the law. But they want people to use their service to keep coming back. And eventually, as we all know, it boils down to money to get people to get a subscription with them to keep being fed this information.
Lauren, I went online the other day and someone sent me a link. It was a news reporter in a studio. She was, doing stories. Her voice was over video, just like we see. This was not a real woman at all. She didn't exist. I mean, in the world of journalism, this is something that we are really having to grapple with. What are your thoughts, especially from your journalistic perspective, about AI and the way that it's being used and showing up everywhere?
Well, one of the things is you all were talking about the political atmosphere earlier. One of the scary things is about chatbots. They learn from data sets. I talked about this with Roland earlier with the AI executive order. This information is learning from pre-existing data sets. So what can happen? We can have a group of people have information generated for them and they do not contest it, because we know people take things at face value. So a journalist right now will not even have to write an article and they can sway people to vote left, right, down the middle, whatever their political affiliation is. But in the field of journalism, I talked to journalists and told them, your field is going to be greatly impacted by artificial intelligence. You must retrain. You must learn how artificial intelligence works. Use your communication skill set to keep yourself employable, because artificial intelligence is here. It's not going anywhere. It is going to get more sophisticated. And the key word is it's going to get cheaper to use. So many companies are going to implement it more.
So, Patrick, I'm going to turn this over to the panel right now. Lauren, who is a journalist, I'm sure that you are feeling this encroachment, are you not?
Not yet, but I think certainly the technology threatens the entire franchise in terms of anytime you have a technology that can duplicate the content that you're producing, which it hasn't gotten to that point yet. But the strategy to get even more granular about what you're writing in a way that would be very hard for any machine to duplicate has become sort of the new strategy for a lot of hyper-localized news organizations and platforms. The thing I think about is that I've never seen big tech lose a case yet. I have not seen them lose a big case yet. And one of the big issues that has been out there for years, it's never been fixed yet. Canada fixed it, but we haven't fixed it, is platforms like Facebook using other people's content to make money and sell ads against when they're not producing the content. That's been going on for years. Nobody's stopping that, and that train is just going down the track. But I do think that it's going to be interesting to see how the New York Times is going to argue how that their uniquely valuable works created by them is not, in fact, a new work created by a machine that is very clever, creating a separate thing. Though they're arguing it's based on their work, one could argue that about almost anything in journalism that is a rewrite.
That's right.
The Associated Press does rewrites all day long. Journalists do rewrites all day long. There's very little original reporting generated by a reporter. It's usually a rewrite of somebody else's work. So I'm not sure why that wouldn't be a copyright infringement. Microsoft has taught a machine how to do it. That's what we're talking about right now. And so I think it threatens the entire franchise if you're the New York Times, but if you're a small news organization that's found a niche that is extremely difficult to copy, that's how you would evade this type of issue.
I do want to say that Facebook has settled a few lawsuits that have amounted to very little money individually in terms of using your information for advertisement, but that still does continue in many different ways that has not appeared in the courts. Dr. Carr, comments or question for Patrick?
Thank you, Candace, and thank you, Brother Dix. I mean, I have so many questions that I, as a professor, understand that my chosen profession is getting ready to go the way of the dinosaur. I just finished grading papers a couple of weeks ago, and
Mm-hmm.
the the Chat GPT papers. They're well written if they spend some time, and they don't reflect at all. Then the students I'm thinking about, no, you didn't write this because I see writing in clay. So either I'm going to have to resort. You got to write this paper in front of me, out your hand on some paper, and give it to me old school like when I was a kid, or you can just acknowledge that along with journalism, along with entertainment, along with screenwriters, script writers, intellectual workers are about to go the way of the dinosaur. With that in mind. And I know this help me with this. Like I said, I had so many questions. This Sam Altman business at OpenAI, is there something called open general intelligence? In other words, a computer solves a problem that isn't based on data that was put in it, and it scared the hell out of the people. And they say, wait a minute. It's now thinking independent of the data we put in it, which is what that Altman business was about. Because Altman is like, we can make all the money in the world. My question is this. What is the New York Times interest in this beyond the kind of financial interest? Because I'm assuming that at some point they're going to replace most, if not all, of their workforce with intelligence. In other words, and how are the interests of the people who actually do the writing, like a Lauren Victoria Burke, come? Because I'm not assuming the New York Times interest is the same as the interest of the people who write for the New York Times.
Well, their interest could be, as we all know, revolves around money. The New York Times could create their own software and license it to other newspapers, or they can buy out other newspaper companies and say, hey, we have our own software. We'll license it to you. We'll patent it. And you can have the software to do your own news articles. The other thing is you can have people like myself, the four of us, just sit around and say, hey, we have this software. Let's go to the New York Times. Let's go to the Miami Herald. I'm in South Carolina. Let's go to the State Paper, and let's go to the Chicago Tribune. We can get information from all four of those sources and create our own little news station. Not brick and mortar. It's all online and create newsletters with that piece of software. And as long as we know how to be in the gray area, we can never be sued. And we could generate readers to come to our website and say, hey, you're tired of having other folks put their opinion in the news? Listen to our Newsweek. Not our Newsweek. Listen to our news articles. Read what we have on our website. This is straight news, no ads, no nothing. And at the end of the day, as I always say, it's about money. And that's why the New York Times has a vested interest in it, because they're seeing the potential of how what they're doing right now. They say, hey, this case could lead to something else to make us more money, because as you were saying, they're going to get rid of all of their people. Why not have the software licensed to other big-time newspapers? Mm-hmm. Then we're gonna talk about sports writers. I mean, we're talking about everything. It's already going to encapsulate several repetitive jobs. So if you can have people generate an article, perfect example before I finish, you all were just talking about with Trump in Maine, artificial intelligence could have wrote an article in about 4 or 5 nanoseconds.
Sure.
Just the time it came out versus a journalist having to verify the information is correct. And as we all know, people, once they see something at face value, they take it with it and run with it.
Dr. Carr, you can appreciate this. I know that a lot of universities, they get so many complaints and cases of students who are using AI, and you can do a search, and as you know, you can tell when a C student is all of a sudden writing like the New York Times. That's a first giveaway. But some of these schools are saying, we have so many cases, we can't do anything with them. We're a school that needs to run the school, and if we spend our time on all of these cases, it's going to slow down what we are even here to do. Now, Dr. Daniel Black down at Clark University, spoke to him a few weeks ago, and he said what you just said, Dr. Carr. He has his students right in front of him, longhand, with a pen, to make sure that work is theirs. I said, well, that's a solution. That is a solution.
I mean, it is. And, I know Dan for 30 years. We laugh about that because that is a solution. But here's the thing, Kenneth, and help me because, I don't know if you've seen anything in the courts on this, because it doesn't seem like there's nothing out there. I don't know how they're going to rule on this. But we're on the verge of a restructuring of all these institutions. And, Brother Dix, when you put it that way, like you said, they're fighting over how they're going to be able to make money in this intellectual property. I don't know, Kenneth. How do you think the courts are going to sort this out? Because even at a point where, and you're talking about universities, they're not just talking about students. First of all, the plagiarism software can't catch it.
Right.
So you get that. The universities are now telling the faculty members, in order to be productive and do your research, you need to lean into this. So it isn't just. So I guess what I'm asking is, how are the courts going to sort this out when there's absolutely no precedent for this? I mean, you have any thought? I'm asking you, but what do you think?
Well, I think what Lauren said is right, and that is this: journalists do rewrite rights all the time. I mean, some outlets, you are expected, and it's okay to use their copy verbatim. And how many ways can you say, Trump got kicked off the ballot in Wisconsin or whatever? So, that's one thing. But on the other hand, when you're talking about ChatGPT, but for the fact that you have original information to take from, you're not going to get any automated response. So they, meaning OpenAI or me, the user, who knows that I'm using someone else's intellectual property, I am taking it from someone else. That's just the truth. If I am a user and a New York Times article comes out and it's 3 sentences that are the exact same, which happens, that is an intellectual property infringement. That is just the bottom line. But the precedent that it will set, if the courts decide in favor and go against AI, it's just going to make things explosive. And I would say my final answer is that they're going to lean on the side of technology so as not to upset the apple tree. Patrick, what do you think? What do you think ultimately when it gets into the hands of the courts, what will the outcome be? And we'll end it there.
I think the courts, as we were saying earlier, are going to rule in favor of the companies because you cannot do anything with technology. And as we know, a lot of these companies are in the back pockets of a lot of politicians. So who would you go with? You're going to go with who can make things easier and who can come up with the money. It all boils down to money. And people rarely go against Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, and those companies, because if those companies cut you off, you cannot do anything. Technology is just going to get technology is going to magnify even more in 2024 and here and beyond. And I tell folks, just be prepared. We haven't seen anything yet. So just get prepared. That's the best thing I tell everyone.
Absolutely. And here's a final note before we move on to a break. United States want to compete with other countries, right? So there is no way that we are going to put ourselves behind other countries and not advance ourselves in the world of AI. We are not going to stop that ship from floating. All right. First of all, I want to thank you for being with us.